Hi everybody, welcome back to CMN 153. This is for our class for Thursday, the 29th of July, where we are finishing up our discussions about the internet, and we are also talking about books. Your internet journal is going to be due today on the 29th at 11:59 p.m. Be very similar to what you did with the advertising journal. And for the advertising journal, I'm returning that back to you, to your email. And by the time you see this video, I'm hopeful that you would have received your journal with my feedback. It's a commentary basically on paper, as if we were having a conversation, you and I. I don't evaluate it for grammar or mechanics, just for content. And I was asking for about a page or so where you were responding to advertising and public relations. And we saw a few videos related to advertising and public relations, and I also spent some time talking about it in class video. We spent some time in our discussion forum discussing it, and also the textbook talked about it as well. So all of that could be used as a vehicle for your journals, but your own experience with advertising and public relations are also ways that you could approach the journal. And I'm thinking about a page or so, but as long or as short as you'd like it to be. And a plus grade would be excellent. A check plus would be very good. A check would be satisfactory. There also is a less than satisfactory and unsatisfactory. Check minus and minus. And basically one journal by itself isn't worth very much, but all of them together form a sizable component of your grade. So the idea is that by the ending of the semester, you will have responses to all of the major forms of media. So that's one of the ways that you are being evaluated this semester. There also is a final essay exam, open book, open notes, dealing with the topics that we are discussing about media. So that is also another component. And lastly, your final project is a component of your grade where I am asking you to evaluate something in regards to media and popular culture in some more depth. We started talking about that last class, and we will continue to discuss that over the course of this semester. So those are the major components for your evaluation, as well as just class participation, which is answering the discussion forums, watching the videos, and so forth. So what I wanted you to do was to watch a particular video about Tim Berners-Lee. It is an interview with him about how he feels about what has become of the World Wide Web. You'll remember Tim Berners-Lee created basically the World Wide Web, and he did not take commercial credit for it in the way that many other individuals who are pioneers in the internet have made great profit off of it. And I think this interview, it's approximately 22 minutes or so. It gives you a sense of the kind of person that he is, what his intent was in relation to the internet, and some of the concerns that he has about how the internet and the World Wide Web is being used. And then there is a 6-minute video that follows that about his devastation over the misuse of the World Wide Web and some of his plans to try to stop that misuse. He has a project called Solid, where what he's trying to do is to make sure that all of us have privacy in terms of our data, and that we decide when and how to release our data rather than corporations making those decisions for us. So it's a very interesting project. I don't know how long it will take him to fulfill his goals and whether or not it's even possible to fulfill his goals, but I think everybody is in agreement that the internet has moved into places that one could never conceptualize, and those places are oftentimes very dark and troubling. So that pretty much puts closure on what we were talking about in relation to the internet, though certainly that's something that you can investigate further in your journals and for a final project if you so elected to. But I wanted to move forward to books, which is chapter 10 of the edition of the textbook which I had ordered, which is usually considered to be the oldest mass medium. And certainly you can talk about something like music that has existed since the beginning of time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that music was a mass medium since the beginning of time, because ultimately, and we will discuss this when we get to the music section, we needed to have some sort of a vehicle to make it a mass medium. And basically, this goes all the way back to Egyptian papyrus and Babylonian clay tablets. So we're talking about something like 2400 BC. Parchment being treated animal skin. And the 4th century introduced the Roman Codex. This is where parchment sheets were sewn together with leather wrapped wood covers. And that basically helped to revolutionize the book in the way that we think of the book today. And in fact, I'm going to have a video about the history of the book that I would like you to watch that gives you a nice overview of all of this. From around 400 to 1500 AD is when medieval manuscripts came into play. These were books that were printed and illustrated by hand, oftentimes works of art. There were very few people who were literate. Oftentimes they were associated with the clergy. In 1450, a revolutionary date, the Gutenberg printing press, which allowed for a movable type that printing on parchment. And this is where really the book became the kind of mass medium that we think of in relation to today. In the 1800s is when paperback books were introduced. These were machine-made papers with cloth covers that led to a good amount of cost reduction and mass production. And now literacy also was something that was embraced by the masses. The 1800s is also when we had publishing houses, companies that produced books. And much like everything else with the internet, publishing houses have a lot less influence than what they used to have in terms of what can be published, since obviously authors can now be self-published over the internet. And that said, while there were lots of predictions that the internet would replace the physical book, that has not happened. Certainly, independent bookstores have suffered because of the internet. And Amazon.com actually began as a bookseller. And obviously we see how they not only took over books, but they took over the world of commerce as well and completely changed commerce. But there is something about the physicality of a book, the tactile sensations associated with it, the touch, even the smell, the ease of finding information, annotating information that you just can't find electronically, at least thus far, with the way that ebooks are structured on screen. Of course, once we get these general publishing houses, this also led to differentiation. So you've got trade books that are geared towards general readers, but you've also got professional books that are geared towards specific occupation. Textbooks, of course, that are geared towards students. And the textbook industry, like everything else, has experienced a revolution with the ability to find electronic resources. Religious books, the Bible and all of its versions being the best-selling book of all time. Comic books and graphic novels. This is particularly interesting because in the 1950s, the Comic Book Association of America basically self-regulated and self-censored itself because there were calls that their comics were too gruesome and graphic. This was the heyday of the horror comics that helped influence individuals like Stephen King. And some of you might be aware that I teach a medium popular culture class in horror film in the fall and spring semesters, and we talk more about the 1950s Comic Magazine Association and the importance of Stephen King for the idea of horror films. There also is University Press scholarly books, and much like all of the other media that we will be discussing over the course of the semester, there was this sense of convergence with audio, film, TV, and of course now we've got the electronic revolution. Now, a place that's rather interesting in terms of books is Argentina, Buenos Aires to be exact, where there is no book sales tax and there's fixed pricing. The idea is to try to encourage readership and literacy rates as much as possible. And in fact, they have more bookstores per capita than any other city, so perhaps it's been effective. Iceland is also particularly interesting because of one of their customs associated with books, and I hope I don't mangle the pronunciation of this. The Jola Bokaflod. And this is the exchange of books on Christmas Eve. And their tradition is that you exchange a book with chocolates on Christmas Eve, and basically you spend the night reading your book. The holiday season actually begins with free household distribution of catalogs of newly published Icelandic books. Perhaps it's not that surprising then when we look at literacy rates. Number 1 is Finland, number 2 is Norway, number 3 is Iceland. Notice how the United States is not in the top 3. And I happen to teach a class in women's literature of the 1800s, and we begin by reading an essay entitled The Cult of True Womanhood by Barbara Welty that came out in 1960, and it examines basically magazines and periodicals from 1820 to 1860 to try to get a sense as to what the culture of the time was like. And we'll talk more about this when we get to the magazine section, how oftentimes we can view something like a magazine as a lens into the norms and the values, the attitudes, the beliefs, and the behaviors of a populace, which is exactly what this scholar did in 1960. And so you can see that while Jean Kilbourne was doing cutting-edge work in 1970 and in subsequent decades, you've got others such as Barbara Welty doing somewhat similar things in the 1960s with their examinations of periodicals of the 1820s to 1860s to get an idea of what was valued. And there was a quote that I thought was particularly relevant when it comes to books from that particular article. Quote, "The female was dangerously addicted to the novel, according to the literature of the period. She should avoid them, since they interfered with, quote, serious piety," unquote, which is supposed to be one of the hallmarks for a woman during the time period. And if she simply couldn't help herself and read them anyway, she should choose edifying ones from the list of morally acceptable authors. The 19th century knew that girls could be ruined by a book. Books which attacked or seemed to attack women's accepted place were regarded as dangerous. And obviously books can lead to revolution. Education can lead to revolution. It's one of the reasons why slaves in the United States were forbidden to learn how to read or write, because of the dangers associated with knowledge and access to knowledge. And Fahrenheit 451, a book written by Ray Bradbury that is about actually books and censorship. And I highly encourage you to read this book if you haven't had the opportunity to already do so. It was written in 1953. It's set in a future dystopia where books actually are burned by firemen. Firemen no longer put out fires. They, in fact, start fires, since everything is fireproof in this society. And their job is to set fire to books, because basically books have dangerous ideas. And books are illegal in this society. In fact, the book is called Loaded Gun in the House Next Door. And in fact, next class, I'll read you some passages from Fahrenheit 451. But I wanted you to watch a video. It's approximately 8 minutes long or so. That's entitled From Tablet to Codex and Beyond, The History of the Book. And this is from the State Library in Victoria in 2020. And it was about their exhibit about books, but it also does a very nice job with giving us an overview of books. And then there is another interesting video that I wanted you to watch. What we learned from 5 million books. This was done in 2011, and basically they were database examinations from a scientific perspective to try to get a sense as to what language is used in books. And this is something that is as old as the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED, which is considered to be the dictionary of all dictionaries. When it used to appear in print, it was basically encyclopedic, in that there would be multiple volumes that would give multiple definitions of words and their usage over time in various pieces of literature. And now it's an electronic source that is continually updated in their attempt to have every word in the English language. So in some ways, it's somewhat similar to what we learned from the 5 million books in terms of gathering data about language and usage. However, they go a step further and they try to draw conclusions about this data. And even though it's somewhat dated from 2011, I think it's a quite interesting analysis. And that's approximately 14 minutes or so. So what we've got this class are shorter videos for you to be watching. And then ultimately our class discussion forum question, and that'll be due on Friday the 30th at 1 p.m. And I encourage you to do research. I encourage you to ask family and friends. I encourage you to browse bookshelves and to browse the internet. The question is quite subjective, and I oftentimes like subjective questions because it allows the opportunity for thinking and for debating. What do you think are the top 3 culturally significant books, and why? Of course, we're talking about our culture, Western culture. What do you think are the top 3 culturally significant books, and why? And again, I encourage you to do as much research as you'd like, and I encourage you to have as much discussion as you'd like with family, with friends, on social media. The answers are much less important than the rationale. So I'm quite interested to see which books you will identify as the top 3 culturally significant books. I've also got my own as well that I will be discussing next class. So this will basically end today's video. I ask you again to watch the links below in our notes that I have identified for you to get some more background with the internet, specifically Tim Berners-Lee, and also some videos about books. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And we will continue on next class where I will read some passages from Fahrenheit 451, and we will continue on for the semester. Take care. Bye-bye.